I don't want your results, so I ain't taking your advice. Jordan Schaefer, DZ Tribe, Josh Thomas. I want to talk to you today about a 1981 IBM computer. Oh man, this thing was beautiful. It had that kind of signature off-whitish plastic color from the 80s, if you know what I'm talking about, where it was like it used to be white back when, you know, your grandma was dating your grandpa, and 40 years later, after 5,000 packs of cigarettes, it just kind of got this little dingy yellowish type of thing. That's what this thing looked like. Okay, now, more important than the computer itself, which was a beast. I mean, a beast. This thing took up, imagine it's probably was about 2 feet wide. There was a tower involved. You had to get this entire, I don't know if you can even do this anymore, but they had this actual computer tower, like a piece of furniture, that housed the tower itself, and then the keyboard, and then the monitor, which was gargantuan. It was the CRT tube monitor, and it was just like the biggest thing ever. And then there was a printer on top of it. Came with a printer, okay, but it was one of those like teeth-fed printers that puts out the green and white striped paper. Like all of the old people listening to me right now are like, oh yeah, that just takes me back into the day, but all of the young people are like, what are you talking about, dude? That's weird. I know it's weird. And it was weird to me. And that's why I want to tell you this story, because I got this computer that was made in 1981 by IBM. I got this computer in 1993. 1993, I got this computer. A 1981 computer was 12 years old when I got it. It was new to me. So I'm going to tell you the story about this because there was such a strong lesson that I got. And it's such a fond memory now, even though at the time I was kind of pissed. So my grandfather, Jim King, an amazing man, just one of the most incredible and influential people in my life. He was just such an outstanding guy. His entire family looked up to him as a leader. And I got to see the more docile side of him. Apparently he was a little more, aggressive and didn't mind speaking his mind when he was younger. But by the time I came around, he was pretty chilled out, and he was just an old guy, just an old man. He liked to ride his riding lawnmower in the backyard, and he let me do it sometimes. And but he worked at IBM for 35 years. And he started, I think it was in the early 60s, like 1963 or something like that. I mean, he got a job at IBM when computers were the size of your house, okay? And all that computer that was the size of your house could do was basic arithmetic, And like that's the IBM that my grandfather walked into. And then he was there for a long time, almost 2 generations, and eventually they realized, well, hey, who's this old guy that has no college degree that we're paying 3 times as much as these engineers that are graduating from the local college? I think it's time for him to go. And so they very gently but firmly asked him to retire, and he got a golden pen, which I now have in my possession. He probably got some other things too, but I have the pen. So, what a great guy, and what great lessons that he taught me. And I want to go into one specific lesson that I learned somewhat indirectly from him. So 1993, Christmas time, sitting there at their house, and everybody's opening their presents. And, I'm a 13-year-old boy. I want cool shit, I want some new shoes. I really had been eyeing this Nike windbreaker. There was probably some Nintendo game that I wanted on my Super Nintendo. I was really looking forward to it because going to Grandma's house for Christmas, like Grandma always got you the good stuff. Grandma and Grandpa always came through. Mom was at the time kind of struggling financially, and so she did the best that she could, and she always came through and got me some cool stuff. But it was Grandma and Grandpa, they always got me the good stuff, And so I have to be careful because I have to make sure I'm very deliberate with my words because my mom actually listens to these podcasts and then talks to me about them. Hey, Mom, how you doing? And so I want to make sure that I present this in the most positive light possible. Love you, Mom. Appreciate everything you've done for me. But it's just the point is, Grandma and Grandpa usually gave me cool stuff, and they always came through. But this year I had these huge boxes, and they were wrapped up. And I'm like, okay, that's gigantic. I have no freaking clue what that could possibly be. All right, I can't wait to open that. What could it be? I mean, it was like they were gigantic boxes, and I'm like trying to imagine all of the possible things that this could be. And it also could be like a gag. Like they could have just put a bunch of cinder blocks in there and it's just like a pair of underwear or something. That happens too. That happened in our family. And so it's my turn. My turn to open it up. And so I open up the box and I reach in and I pull out this big old dingy keyboard. And it was like, okay. And I reach further into the box and I see this monitor, and I pull the monitor out. And first of all, it weighed like 100 fucking pounds, but it was just like, okay, I pulled it out. All right, nice. But it was old, man. It was so old. This is 1993. Now imagine if you were born after 1993, it can't help you. But if you're somewhere in your 30s or 40s, just imagine, what computers looked like back in the day and, subtract 12 years. So this thing comes out and it's like the biggest tube TV monitor I've ever seen. And then there's the tower, and the tower was like cartoonishly large. And so I pull this thing out and there was a printer. Don't forget the tooth-fed printer with the green and white paper. And so I'm looking at this thing and I'm so perplexed. I'm like, what is this? And then I look at my grandpa and he looks back at me and he says, well, that's a computer. And I'm like, well, yeah, I know it's a computer. Well, you need to, if you want to get into computers, you really need to learn how they work and you need to start from the beginning. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what the hell are you talking about, man? And so his idea, because he came from the IBM of the 60s, his idea of teaching me how to, kind of be a responsible person is to start from the beginning, start from the basics. This has MS-DOS. DOS, for those of you that aren't familiar, is before we had iOS or OS 10 or Windows and all this stuff, there was DOS. And DOS is like a black screen with a flashing cursor where you type in letters and numbers and tell the computer to do things. He's like, oh, it's got DOS. If you want to really know computers, you got to start with the basics, and that starts with DOS. And so I was like, I love my grandpa to death. I love him so much. I looked up to him and I admired him, and he's just been such a huge presence in my life. And man, I was pissed. And I didn't want to show it either because I was really shy, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much. And then we load this dinosaur up into the car, and I'm heading back home with my mom, and she's like, well, what do you think of your presents? And I'm like, to tell you the truth, I don't know what I'm going to do with this stupid computer. First of all, it's huge. I don't even think it's going to fit in my room. And secondly, like, it's old. It's almost as old as me. I was born in 1980, by the way. So when I was 1 year old, this computer was manufactured. So, like, what am I going to do with this thing? It's ancient. I don't know how to use it. I don't know anything. It's like, well, just figure it out and we'll make it work. I'm like, okay. So this giant monstrosity sits in my bedroom, which was not very big, and it took up a lot of my bedroom. And well, I was bored and I didn't have a whole lot else to do, and so I just turned it on one day and I started trying to figure it out. Now, my grandpa had taught me a couple of things. He taught me how to make tones, how to make sounds come out by typing code. And then he also taught me how to vary the speed or the length of those tones. And so basically, the only thing I ever really did was I could type things on there. But remember, I had like the green and white tooth-fed printer. And so anything I typed on there is going to look like it came from a newsroom in the 70s. So it's like, what am I supposed to do with this? Plus, I didn't really know how to type very much because I just never had a computer. Anyway, so the only thing I ever really did with the computer is I could sit there and following my grandpa's instruction, I could type out some lines of code and have it play songs like melodies, in like computer tones. And that was it. That was the only thing that computer was ever good for. And it was just like, oh, this is the worst. And it wasn't until 5 years later, that I actually got my first legit real computer when I was 18 years old. Never had a computer before that. Well, except for the dinosaur. Finally got rid of it. Never did tell Grandpa, like, oh, hey, you still using that computer? Yeah. Yeah. And I think eventually he stopped asking, and that's when it was like, okay, I got rid of it. And so what was the point of this, right? What did my grandpa want me to know? What was he trying to teach me? And there were a couple of lessons that I really extracted from that experience. First and foremost, don't buy old shit. Go and get the best thing that you possibly can that serves your needs. Go and get the best possible thing that you can that's going to serve your needs. And it will last you as long as it needs to last you. And when it stops working for you, move on. Because otherwise, it's just going to create a burden on you. It's going to take up space. So I got some advice that I'll share in another podcast sometime about getting the best stuff you possibly can. But don't buy old stuff to save money or, to cut corners or anything like that. Don't do that. It's not ultimately the best decision for you. But my grandpa's lessons, though, those were still powerful, and they still stick with me to this day, because what he shared with me was, hey, first and foremost, you need to appreciate how far society has come, right? If you really want to take advantage of what is in front of you right now, appreciate what was there before so that you can understand how it works in the future. Like, okay, great. Appreciate the fact that we can have the internet and we can use cell phones and we've got touch screens. I appreciate that more than probably anybody else my age ever will because of this dinosaur. Okay, I appreciate the fact that somebody's out there constantly pushing the boundaries of technology so that we can benefit. Thank you, Grandpa, for that lesson. The other lesson that he taught me is anything worth doing is worth doing right. And that was what he was really trying to instill in me by getting me this computer. Hey, if you're going to use a computer, because his life was computers and computer development. I'm sitting in my office right now, and him and three of his colleagues in the 80s created some kind of mechanism for the corrective tape, and it got patented. And so he filed for a U.S. patent, and he got it accepted, and then he got this big framed portrait of the patent, and it's hanging in my office right now. He was a very proud guy. He was proud of his success. He was proud of his accomplishments. And he was proud of his association with IBM and computers. And he said, hey, listen, if you really want to do this right, you need to start with the basics, and you need to make sure it gets done right the first time. Anything worth doing is worth doing right. One of the strongest lessons I've ever received from him. And I have taken that with me for decades. And it takes me a long time to get stuff done sometimes. It takes me a long time to make decisions sometimes. It takes me a long time to write a Facebook post or create a video or sometimes doing these podcasts because I want to make sure that I'm doing it right. Now I've gotten a little better at that, and I kind of like loosen up some standards here and there in the sake of brevity occasionally, but only when the quality is not the paramount concern. And so everything that I ever do, if I'm going to stand up on stage, that speech is going to be right. If I'm going to sit here and talk to you, this podcast is going to be right. If I'm going to produce any kind of content, or I'm going to create any kind of product, or I'm going to have any kind of conversation, that conversation is going to go right. And I learned that from my grandfather. And I learned that partially, not just from this experience, but partially from my 1981 computer. And it was one of the strongest anchors that any person, almost a literal anchor, like if I held onto this thing and jumped into water, I'd sink to the bottom. But it was one of the strongest anchors that anybody could give me about, hey, if you want to do something, do it right. Computers mattered to him. I see all these fancy, Apple II and OS 9 or whatever that was coming out at the time. I see all that, and that's all real cool and everything. But if you're going to understand that, you need to understand the fundamentals and the basics, and you need to get it right, son. So thank you, Jim King. I appreciate you. May you rest in peace. You were a tremendous man, and you've taught me tremendous lessons. And this is just one small piece of it. And I did share, I believe that I shared this in a previous episode, but he taught me another lesson right at the end of his life. And I'll share it again, just in case you missed that episode. So shortly after he retired, he got kind of depressed and, became sedentary and didn't really enjoy life as much because I think he really defined himself by his career. And so the next 20 years were kind of a downhill slide for him, very gradual, but it accelerated towards the end. And until I got a call one day that he was in his last days, and if I wanted to see him, I needed to come now, like today. So my mom and I, we're from Kentucky, but we live in Texas, and so we met up, and somebody, I don't even remember to this day who it was, but somebody bought me a plane ticket because I couldn't afford it at the time, and flew us up there that day. So I got on a plane that afternoon, got to spend the last day or two with him, and he was suffering from dementia, and there were some moments where it just wasn't making a lot of sense. And so it was difficult, but we got through it. The whole family was there. And it was tough. I had never lost anybody before. So on the last day, he was lucid, and he was sitting in his chair, kind of slumped over. And he was a big guy. He was about 6'3", decent sized man. And I'm not that tall. But he was just kind of slumped over, and it just looked like he'd just been defeated. Life had beat him. He was 75 years old. And I walk over in front of him, and it was time to go. I had to go back to the airport. And he looks up at me, and he's lucid. I know that he recognizes me. I know that he understands what's going on, and he looks at me and he says, well, I'm sorry for how all this turned out. And man, I still get choked up every time I tell this story because it was such a powerful moment. And it was just this other opportunity that he gave me indirectly to teach me something, because I was able to look at him and say, no, you don't have anything to be sorry about. Don't be sorry. Because of you, I'm a better man. You have had one of the most tremendous influences on my life of anybody I've ever met. You're an amazing person. Thank you so much for being a good role model for me and showing me how to be a man when nobody else would. And he looked back at me and he said, okay. And I gave him a hug and I walked out, and that was the last thing I ever said to him. So the lesson that he taught me indirectly was, don't leave anything unsaid. Because you never know when you're going to get another chance, or if you will. So, not quite the direction that I wanted this podcast to go, but nonetheless, Jim King, amazing person, one of the two best grandpas I've ever had in my life, and somebody that definitely I aspire to be more like as I continue to grow as a human being. But I can tell you one thing: I am not buying any more 1981 computers. So, hey, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of The Do Zone. And I appreciate you being here. Please do make sure to subscribe, leave a review, comment, tell a friend, share it in your Instagram stories, whatever it is that you prefer to do. But let's spread the word about this episode and about our podcast in general. I love helping people get clarity on what they need to be doing and how they need to be getting shit done. So, hey, until next time, go do something.